It started with a tug on her collar. It ended with a campus-wide reckoning. It was just past noon on a Tuesday at Westbrook University, the kind of day that slips through the cracks. Overcast, mild breeze, the campus in that weird in-between where the energy feels sleepy, but the week is still pushing forward. Inside the canteen, conversations bounced off the tiled walls, sneakers squeaked across the floor, and trays clattered with half-eaten burgers and melting ice in soda cups. At a small table near the window, Jada Ellison sat alone, earbuds in, laptop open, a pen rolling absent-mindedly between her fingers. Her hair was pulled up into a loose puff, edges neatly laid. A gray hoodie draped over her shoulders, sleeves scrunched at the elbows. She wasn't there for lunch. She never ate much during the day, but she liked the noise. It made her feel less isolated, even if no one talked to her. She sipped on a lukewarm coffee, scanning notes for her African American history class. Professor Kellerman had assigned a dense reading on Reconstruction and the birth of systemic inequality. Heavy stuff, but Jada found comfort in the clarity of it. At least in history, you could trace how we got here. Real life? It was messier, slippery. A voice from the next table broke through her focus. "Yo, is that the girl who always corrects people in class?" It was said just loud enough for her to hear. Laughter followed, low and mean. Jada didn't look up. She heard that tone before. The one people use when they think they're being funny, but mean every word. She pressed pause on her music, but kept her eyes on the screen. Another voice chimed in. "Bro, she acts like she's the professor's assistant. Like, relax, we're all getting the same degree." More snickers. She recognized the voices. Zane Hollister, loud, cocky, business major, always late to class. Thought every disagreement was a debate club. And his crew, Connor, the kid who wore frat hoodies like a second skin, and Riley, the girl who never made eye contact but always laughed when Zane made a joke. Jada swallowed her frustration. She could have said something, but she'd done that before. It never went how people think it should. The table behind her got quieter for a moment, then louder again. She tried to ignore it, eyes flicking back to her reading. "Yo," Zane said suddenly. "I got a question for you." Jada didn't answer. He wasn't talking to her, or maybe he was, but he wasn't inviting her into a conversation. "You always look so serious, like you're analyzing everybody's trauma or something. You ever just, I don't know, chill?" Now she looked up. Zane had swiveled around in his seat, his expression half grin, half smirk. Connor snorted. Riley sipped from her straw, her eyes flicking toward Jada, then away. Jada blinked, once. Then calmly, without a word, she looked back at her screen. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Zane stood up, walked over, slowly, like this was still a game to him, like he thought she was being dramatic. "Hey," he said, tilting his head like he was talking to a confused dog. "I'm trying to lighten the mood. Why you gotta be so—" And then without warning, he reached down and tugged at the front of her hoodie collar. Not hard, not violent, but enough. Enough to make her body jerk slightly forward. Enough to make 3 people at nearby tables pause mid-conversation. Enough to make her chest tighten in that old, familiar way, like someone just walked into her space with muddy shoes and laughed while doing it. But the room didn't go quiet, not fully. Conversations just dipped, like they sensed something was off, but no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Zane stood over her now, still holding the edge of her collar like it was some kind of punchline, like this was a sitcom, and she was the joke. Jada didn't flinch. She didn't pull away, either. She slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. No blink, no expression, just stillness. "You done?" she asked quietly, voice low but steady. Zane hesitated. His smirk faded for a split second, then came back, weaker this time. "Damn, relax, it was a joke." Jada leaned back, brushing his hand off her hoodie like dust. "No, it wasn't." A few students nearby shifted in their seats. Some glanced over, others pretended not to notice. The air got heavier, not like drama, but like tension that had been building for too long and finally leaked out where people could see it. Zane looked around, trying to read the room. Connor chuckled from the other table, clearly uncomfortable. "Yo, Z, chill, man," he mumbled, half laughing, half hoping this whole thing would dissolve back into harmless banter. But it didn't. Jada closed her laptop. "Let me ask you something," she said, still calm. "Would you have done that to a white girl sitting here by herself?" Zane looked caught. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out right away. Connor leaned back, trying not to be part of it. Riley stared at her phone. Zane finally shrugged. Come on, don't make this about race. You always got to take it there. That word, there, hit the table like a dropped fork. Jada stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just stood. She looked straight at him, her eyes clear, her voice unshaken. It's already about race. You just didn't think I'd say it out loud. Someone 2 tables over stopped mid-bite. A girl near the vending machine looked over. This wasn't background noise anymore. It was happening. Zane folded his arms. Nah, you're being sensitive. There it was again. Sensitive. The word that gets tossed at people like Jada every time they call something what it is, every time they don't let ignorance pass without being checked. But Jada didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't cuss him out or storm off. She took a breath and said, clear enough for half the canteen to hear, you think you get to decide how I should feel when you disrespect me. That's not how this works. There was a pause. One of those weird ones where everyone tries to pretend they're still eating or talking, but really, they're listening. Then Zane gave a short laugh, forced and empty. Man, you need to lighten up, for real. Jada didn't respond. She just looked at him a moment longer and then gathered her things, slipping her laptop back into her bag. And then it happened. From behind them, a student stood up. Asha Morales, Jr., political science major. She'd been 2 tables over, earbuds out, silent the whole time. But now she raised her voice. She's not the one who needs to lighten up, bro. Heads turned. Zane blinked. What? Asha stepped forward. You grabbed her. That's not a joke. That's harassment. Someone in the back whispered, Damn! Zane looked around, suddenly aware that the room had shifted. He wasn't in control of the moment anymore. And then quietly, a phone camera clicked on. Not flashy, just someone recording now. Because they knew no one would believe it later if there wasn't proof. But what came next wasn't about Zane anymore. It was about everyone else who sat and watched, wondering if they should say something too. Zane took a half step back, eyes darting between Jada, Asha, and the students who were now watching with open interest. For once, his grin was gone, replaced with confusion, embarrassment, maybe even fear. But he wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. I didn't grab her, he muttered. I touched her hoodie. Chill out. Asha shook her head, folding her arms. You don't get to define what you did just because you didn't like the way it landed. That line got murmurs, quiet ones, but real. No more pretending this wasn't happening. Meanwhile, Jada stayed silent, bag over her shoulder, standing there like a statue that refused to be ignored. She looked toward the front of the canteen, where 2 campus security guards had entered. They hadn't seen anything, yet, but you could tell they felt the shift in the room. Something was off. Someone had gone to get them. That's how fast it moved now. 1 second, it's a conversation. The next, it's a potential incident. Zane turned toward the guards, then back to Jada. His voice lowered, suddenly nervous. You're not really about to make this a thing, right? Jada's expression didn't change. It is a thing. That's when Dr. Rena Obasi, an ethics professor who usually kept to herself in the faculty lounge, appeared near the salad bar. She'd been on her lunch break, but had overheard the last few minutes. She walked over, lips pressed tight, eyes focused. She didn't ask what happened. She looked straight at Zane. Leave, now. Zane blinked. I said leave. He hesitated, his ego visibly clashing with the authority in her voice. But he turned, muttered something under his breath, and walked off, Connor and Riley awkwardly trailing behind him. The canteen didn't cheer. This wasn't a movie, but there was a strange collective exhale, like everyone had been holding something in without realizing it. Jada still hadn't sat down. Her fingers were gripping her bag a little tighter now. Her eyes darted, not in panic, but in that way someone scans a room to see what's safe, what's performative, and what's just staring. One of the guards approached her. Miss, are you okay? She nodded slowly. Yeah. Do you want to file a report? She paused. The weight of that question wasn't lost on her. Because filing a report meant meetings. It meant emails. It meant being the one who brought race into the conversation. Again. But this time, she didn't hesitate long. Yes. The guard nodded, scribbled her name down, then stepped aside. Asha touched her shoulder gently. You good? Jada finally exhaled. I will be. She walked out with the guard, and for the first time that day, the silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was thick with reflection. Not because everyone agreed with her, but because no one could pretend they didn't see it now. Outside, under the gray clouds, Jada kept walking, past the courtyard, past the statue of the university's founder, whose bronze face had been weathered and forgotten. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was something else, something she couldn't name, but had been carrying for years. And even though her legs felt heavy and her chest was tight, she kept walking, because this didn't end in the canteen. It never did. But the story wasn't finished, not by a long shot, because what happened next didn't take place in person. It happened online. It started with a single clip, just 38 seconds long, posted by a sophomore named Devin Rollins, a computer science major who'd been sitting across the room eating curly fries when it all went down. He hadn't planned on recording anything, but when Zane walked over to Jada's table, something told him to press record. By the time Jada asked, "Would you have done that to a white girl sitting here by herself?" He already had his phone steady. He posted it with no caption, just the location tag, Westbrook University Canteen. Within an hour, it was being reshared across group chats. 2 hours later, it was on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. 12 hours later, it had over 2.5 million views. Jada didn't even know about the video until that night. She was in her room scrolling through emails when her roommate Keisha Banks burst in holding her phone like it was on fire. "Yo, you're trending." Jada looked up, confused. "What?" "Trending, like viral. You need to see this." She took the phone and watched the video. Her face, her voice, her question. Then the pan of the crowd, the silence, the tension, everything captured exactly as it happened. Her stomach dropped. Not because she regretted anything, but because she knew what came next. Comments, opinions, people who weren't there deciding how she should have handled it. "You're not checking the replies, are you?" Keisha asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Jada shook her head. "No." Keisha nodded slowly. Smart. The next morning, she couldn't walk 10 feet on campus without someone staring. Some smiled awkwardly, like they wanted to say good for you but weren't sure if it was their place. Others looked away like eye contact was radioactive. Then there were the ones who approached her with all the wrong energy, like they were meeting a celebrity instead of a student just trying to get to class. By noon, she'd been mentioned in 3 campus-wide emails, one from the Office of Student Affairs promising a thorough and thoughtful investigation, one from the Dean of Diversity Initiatives filled with words like accountability and growth opportunities, and one from the university president who had never once spoken to Jada directly in 2 years, but now called the incident unfortunate and deeply troubling. That part made her laugh. Unfortunate? The weather was unfortunate. This was deliberate. Still, the video didn't just spread noise. It sparked something real. Student groups started organizing. People who had been silent before were now writing think pieces for the student paper. Some professors paused lectures to talk about race, power, and how fast casual becomes cruel. Even Dr. Obasi brought it up in her seminar. Jada sat in the back row, her hoodie pulled low. She didn't speak. She just listened. But then came the messages. Dozens, then hundreds. Some thanking her, some sharing their own stories. But others weren't kind. Anonymous accounts calling her angry, divisive, overdramatic. A few even told her to drop out. Jada didn't respond. She just screenshotted everything and saved it in a folder called The Noise. Keisha noticed her scrolling late one night and asked, "You okay?" Jada nodded. "Yeah." But she wasn't. She was overwhelmed, not broken, not scared, but exhausted. Still, through the fog of opinions and headlines, something kept her grounded. That question she'd asked in the canteen, it wasn't just a clapback, it was a mirror, and a lot of people didn't like what they saw in it. But before any real change could happen, Jada had to face one more conversation, the hardest one of all, with Zane. And this time, he wasn't surrounded by laughter. 3 days after the video blew up, Jada received an email from Dean Sherwood's office requesting a mediation meeting. The tone was polished, almost sterile, filled with words like reconciliation and constructive dialogue. But tucked between the lines was what it really meant. Zane wanted to talk. Jada stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't need closure. She wasn't looking for an apology. But part of her wanted to look him in the eye without a crowd, No noise, no phones, no shield. She typed one word, accepted. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. in a bland conference room on the third floor of the Student Center. The walls were beige, the chairs made of cheap vinyl. A pitcher of water sat in the middle of the table like anyone would touch it. Zane was already there when she walked in. Alone, slouched in his chair, phone in hand, legs spread like he still thought he was king of something. Dean Sherwood nodded at her. "Jada, thank you for coming." She sat. Her hands were in her lap, perfectly still. Zane looked up. Not defiant, not smug, just awkward. He cleared his throat. "Hey." Jada raised her eyebrows slightly. "Hey." Dean Sherwood gave a brief rehearsed speech about accountability and mutual understanding. Then he turned it over to Zane, who didn't speak right away. Instead, he pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Jada expected him to read from it, but he didn't. "I wrote something," he started, "but it sounded fake, so I'm just going to talk." She said nothing. He took a breath. "I messed up, that's obvious. What I did, it wasn't a joke. I was trying to be funny at your expense, and I didn't even think about what it meant. I didn't think about you as a person, I just did what I always do." Jada tilted her head. "What's that?" He hesitated. "Try to make people laugh, even if it means being a jerk." She let that hang in the air. Then, "And grabbing me, that part funny too?" Zane shook his head. "No, that was way over the line. I get that now." Dean Sherwood glanced between them but didn't interfere. Zane looked up again. "I'm not gonna sit here and say I understand everything. I don't. But watching that video back, seeing myself like that, I hated it. I looked like every dude I swore I wasn't." "Then why'd you do it?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Zane didn't answer right away. "Because I thought I could get away with it. Honest, stupid, true." Jada nodded slowly. That was the most real thing he'd said all week. "And all this time," she said, "you didn't even realize how normal it was for you to treat people like that." "No," he admitted. "I didn't." Silence fell over the room again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. Like after a storm. Jada leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to start thinking before you act. That's not some deep philosophy. That's basic respect." Zane nodded, ashamed, but listening. Actually listening. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. No handshake, no false peace. But something had shifted. As Jada left the building, she scrolled her phone. Another notification. The video had been featured on a segment on a national talk show. They'd called it "A Lesson in Boundaries and Bravery." She smiled, just a little, because it wasn't about going viral. It wasn't even about Zane. It was about being heard. But there was still more to come. Because something else had started behind the scenes. Something Jada hadn't planned, but had to face. The Monday after the meeting, Jada walked into Dr. Kellerman's lecture hall expecting the usual, rows of half-asleep students, slides already projected, maybe one or two raised hands if she was lucky. But that day felt different. People sat straighter, eyes flicked toward her as she entered. She didn't need a spotlight. They gave it to her anyway. She made her way to her seat in the third row. No one said anything, but they didn't ignore her either. Dr. Kellerman cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important that happened on this campus last week." Jada didn't move. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in. "I won't rehash the entire situation," he continued, "but I will say this. What we witnessed, and what we may have participated in by saying nothing, is a reflection of a larger pattern, one that doesn't start or end in a cafeteria." He turned, clicking the next slide, but the message had already landed. Later that day, she received an invitation from the Black Student Coalition to speak at their upcoming town hall. She didn't respond immediately, not because she didn't care. She just wasn't sure she had anything left to say. The energy on campus had changed, but not all of it was welcome. She passed a table near the quad, where a few students she didn't recognize were mid-conversation. "Honestly, I think it's getting blown out of proportion," one of them muttered. "Dude barely touched her." "Yeah," another added, "and now she's all over my feed like she's a hero or something." They didn't see her walking by, but she saw them. and it stung. It always did. How people reduced your pain to a spectacle, a debate topic, or worse, an exaggeration. Back in her dorm, she sat on the floor, cross-legged, scrolling through her email. Among the dozens of invites, one stood out. A message from Dr. Rina Obasi. I wanted to thank you, not just for how you handled yourself, but for what you made visible to this campus. If you're willing, I'd like to sit down sometime and talk more about leadership, advocacy, and what comes next. Your voice matters, Jada, and some of us have been waiting a long time to hear it. That was the first time Jada felt the weight shift, not disappear, but shift. Not because someone praised her, but because someone believed her, without her having to explain or perform. The next day, she went to the town hall, not to give a speech, not to stand on a stage. She sat in the audience, hoodie on, hands tucked under her sleeves, listening. One student stood up, then another, talking about moments they never told anyone about. Being followed in the bookstore, laughed at in class, ignored when raising their hand, and for the first time it didn't feel like complaining. It felt like remembering out loud. Near the end, Asha got up and spoke. Y'all, she said, scanning the room. This didn't start with that video, and it won't end with it either. But what happened wasn't about one person messing up. It was about all of us realizing what we've allowed to feel normal. People nodded, even some who'd never spoken up before. That night, Jada walked back to her dorm in the rain, not pouring, just light, soft drops tapping the pavement. She felt tired, but grounded. And as she reached her building, someone called out behind her. Hey, Jada, right? She turned. It was Riley, Zane's friend. She looked nervous, wet hair sticking to her forehead. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Riley said quickly. For not saying anything, I should have. Jada looked at her for a long moment. You still can, she said. Start now. Riley nodded. Yeah, I will. Jada walked inside without saying more. But she knew the real change wasn't in the apologies. It was in what people did next, when there were no phones recording and no crowd watching. By the next week, things had started to settle, but not in the way people hoped. Because once a moment like that breaks the surface, there's no pushing it back down. The university held its first community dialogue forum on Thursday evening in Columbus Hall, one of the oldest buildings on campus. Rows of folding chairs, free pizza, a half-hearted banner that read, Let's Talk, building a more inclusive Westbrook. The room filled quickly. Jada sat in the back again, hoodie up, notebook open, not taking notes, just sketching. Faces, hands, shadows. She always drew when her head was too loud. At the front of the room, a panel had been set up, a student moderator, 2 professors, and, surprisingly, Zane. He hadn't been invited. He asked to be there. Some people rolled their eyes when they saw him. Others whispered, but he stood up, adjusted the mic, and cleared his throat. I'm not here to defend myself, he said. I already did the wrong thing, and that part's done. He paused. What I want to say is that I grew up thinking intent mattered more than impact. That if I wasn't trying to hurt someone, it couldn't really be that bad. He looked down at his hands. But watching the video, hearing her question, that changed something. A few people scoffed. One girl up front muttered, convenient. He didn't snap back, just nodded like he agreed. Jada watched him closely. She wasn't interested in redemption arcs. She didn't believe in sudden transformations, but she did believe in patterns breaking, one decision at a time. Zane continued, I'm not asking anyone to forgive me. I'm asking the people who think like I used to stop, think, listen. He stepped down without applause. Later that night, outside the forum, he saw Jada leaving and jogged up beside her. Hey. She stopped, but didn't speak. He waited. Then, can I walk with you? She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just kept walking, and he followed. For a few blocks, neither of them said anything. The streetlights flickered overhead. The air was cool. Finally, Jada spoke. Do you know how many times I've had to choose between calling something out and keeping the peace? Zane looked at her. Too many? She nodded. Every day, since middle school. I believe you. You didn't before. I know. They crossed the street in silence. Then she said something she hadn't planned. You ever think about what you're teaching people without realizing it? All the time now, he said, and I hate most of it. She smiled slightly, just a corner of her mouth. That's the part they don't tell you, she said. Waking up is embarrassing. They reached the corner. She stopped. You don't get to be the good guy now. He nodded. I know. But you can be better. Working on it. She looked at him, really looked. Don't stop. And then she turned and walked away, this time for good. No cameras, no audience, just two people on a sidewalk figuring out what it means to be human, flawed, learning, still showing up. But what mattered more than anything else wasn't just what happened to Jada. It was what happened because of her. And that part was only just beginning. The buzz eventually faded. The video stopped trending. The forums ended. The university moved on, like it always did. But people? People remembered. Not because Jada shouted, but because she didn't flinch. Weeks later, in a freshman orientation group, a student asked, "Is it true someone stood up to a guy who grabbed her collar in the middle of the canteen?" Another kid nodded. Yeah. She asked him if he'd have done it to a white girl. And just like that, without her even being there, Jada had become part of the fabric. Not a myth, not a legend, just a fact, a shift, a reminder. That courage doesn't always look like fists or protests. Sometimes it's one voice asking the right question at the right time. She still walked campus with her headphones on, still wore the same hoodie, still sat near the windows in the canteen, only now that table was never quite empty anymore. Sometimes Asha joined her, sometimes Keisha, sometimes complete strangers who didn't want to talk. They just wanted to sit near her, as if the space around her had changed too, as if it had become safer just by her being there. Jada didn't want to be famous. She didn't even want attention. She just wanted to finish her degree, go home for Thanksgiving, call her grandma, be normal. But when someone asked her to speak at the senior class assembly later that semester, she said yes. She stood on stage in a simple black sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, mic in hand, and this is what she said. There's a lot I could tell you about what happened this semester, about what it means to be disrespected in plain sight, and how people pretend not to see it. She paused, scanning the room. But what matters more is this. You don't have to go viral to make something change. You don't have to be perfect to say, that's not okay. People leaned forward. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be clear. She looked down at the front row. Dr. Obasi sat there, nodding slowly. Dean Sherwood, too, hands clasped. I didn't plan to be a lesson. I just got tired of being the punchline. And then she smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just honest. So if you're waiting for the perfect moment to speak up, this is it. If you're wondering if someone else will step in, be that someone. And if you're worried you'll be judged for standing alone, you won't be. Not forever. The room stayed quiet after she finished. Not out of awkwardness, out of respect. She stepped down, left the mic behind, and walked off stage. She didn't wait for the applause. She didn't need it, because she'd already said everything that needed to be said. And the ones who were ready to hear it, they'd carry it forward. Sometimes it only takes one voice in the room to show everyone else what they've been ignoring. Don't wait to be comfortable before you speak up. Say it, ask it, stand there, because silence protects the wrong people. And sometimes dignity doesn't have to be loud. It just has to stand up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that respect isn't optional, and that courage doesn't always come with a crowd.